Hario. Welcome to another session in English. The story that I have taken up today for you is Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom. Nelson Mandela, the first black South African president, a person who was not just an individual but was an institution, a person who valued humanity, a person who struggled for his people, and a true example of a leader. I need not tell you who a leader is. A leader is not he who thinks about himself, but a leader is somebody who, through his values, through his notions, through his principles, comes up to the enlightenment of people. And that is what Mandela did. Very unfortunately, the world saw a phase when the whites or the Western people dominated the world. And the world was categorized under the whites and the blacks. The whites being privileged and the blacks being exploited. Mandela was somebody who came up to fight for the people. He was the one who actually figured out freedom for his people. And finally, there came a day when the oppressed South Africans were finally emancipated, where the oppressed nation, South Africa, saw a new dawn to freedom. Let's start. 10th May dawned bright and clear. For the past few days, I had been pleasantly besieged by the dignitaries and world leaders who were coming to pay their respects before the inauguration. The inauguration would be the largest gathering ever international leaders of South African soil, on the South African soil. For the first time in the history of South Africa, this was going to happen. South Africa, a country, the conglomeration of people the conglomeration was always looked down upon by the rest of the world. Mandela, as a leader, thought for the people. Mandela, as a leader, fought for the people. And Mandela emerged as a power for the people. And finally, when they received independence, this was the first time when all the international leaders had gathered in South Africa to celebrate South African freedom. The ceremonies took place in the lovely sandstone amphitheatre formed by the Union buildings in Pretoria. For decades, this had been the seat of the white supremacy. As I had told you, that the Western people, the white people, the whites, the colonial power, had always exploited the rest of the world, the world of the dark, the world of the black, as they had categorically, segregated the world under two heads, the whites and the blacks. So these white people, the Western people primarily, had always had a supremacy. But for the first time, South Africa fought for itself. For the first time, this leader, Nelson Mandela, empowered the people and also came up with a free nation. Now, for decades, this had been the seat of the white supremacy, and now it was the site of a rainbow gathering of different colors and nations for the installation of South Africa's first democratic, non-racial government. I have always told you that literature talks about values. I have always told you that literature talks about humanity, and this is where you find humanity. There is a conglomeration, there is a variety of people who have actually gathered in South Africa at this particular moment. And very beautifully has the imagery has been, has this imagery been used. Rainbow colored. What does that mean? People from different parts of the world have gathered, international leaders have gathered, people have gathered, and they are finally going to celebrate the installation of a democratic South African government. We in India live in a democratic, we enjoy democracy. A government for the people, of the people, by the people. And that is what even South Africa was going to do. On that lovely autumn day, I was accompanied by my daughter Zenani. On the podium, Mr. de Klerk was first sworn in as the second deputy president. Imagine a place, imagine a group of people, a nation of people who never had a say in anything whatsoever. And from that state, a separate nation comes into being. For the first time, the government gets formed, and it's such a phenomenal movement. It's such a phenomenal movement. It's such a phenomenal moment. So finally, the narration is of course by Nelson Mandela. He's accompanied by Zenani, his daughter. And finally, you also see that de Klerk was the first sworn in the second deputy minister. The second deputy president. Then Thabo Mbeki was sworn in as the first deputy president. When it was my turn, I pledged to obey and uphold the constitution and to devote myself to the well-being of the republic and its people. Let me tell you, a leader is not complete without his people. And that is what you need to realize. Imagine the state of mind that Mandela had at that point of time. Imagine what he was thinking about. I told you, Mandela was not just a man, he was an embodiment of aspirations, he was an embodiment of dreams, he was an embodiment of fight, he was an embodiment of struggles. And finally, all those struggles, all the fights that he had culminated to form a free state, a free nation. So what did he do? He was not a selfish leader. Mandela was not a selfish leader. This chapter basically eulogizes, appreciates, compliments Mandela's contributions to South Africa and the world. He pledged to obey and uphold the constitution and to devote himself to the well-being of the people, because if the people are not happy, a leader can never be happy. To the assembled guests and watching world, I said, today all of us do, by our presence here, confer glory and hope to newborn liberty. This liberty is not about a physical liberty. This liberty is not about just the freedom of movement. It's rather a freedom of thoughts and expression. Tagore, in his poem Where the Mind is Without Fear, had clearly talked about education. He talked about education. He talked about the eradication of national boundaries. He talked about the narrow-mindedness of people that needs to be eliminated. And Mandela's concept of liberty is somewhat similar to that. Remember, there is no liberty without education. Out of the experience of an extraordinary human disaster that lasted too long must be born a society of which all humanity will be proud, and that's more important. We are often judgmental about people. We often like to judge people. But ultimately, remember, nobody is perfect. Nobody is perfect, but at least we need to be humane. Fight for each other, stand for each other, think about each other, and that is how a practical, pragmatic society is born. We who were outlaws not long ago have today been given the rare privilege to host to the nations of the distinguished international guests. We thank all of our distinguished international guests for having come to take possession with the people of our country of what is, after all, a common victory for justice, for peace, for human dignity. What is Modi ji doing today? We are all quarantined in our houses. And what has Modi ji been doing? He has been strengthening relations with the rest of the world. Mandela also talks about the same thing. Today we are facing a national crisis. We are facing an international crisis where COVID-19 has actually taken a toll on the entire humanity. But what is happening is all the nations are coming together. All the human beings need to come together, and this is one thing that ultimately counts. One human standing for the other. And that is what Mandela tells here. They were outlaws. Africa was a country, South Africa was a country with whom many countries had broken their relations of. Politically, socially, South Africa was completely segregated. Now my question is, why so? Did the South African people not have the right to live a life of their own? Did the South African people not have the right to portray their thoughts the way they wanted? Mandela fought for those things. And finally, Mandela won. And today they see a day when everybody gathers to celebrate the South African freedom. And they fight. They have all, everybody has got a common victory for justice, peace, and human dignity. And that is more important. Ultimately, Rabindranath Tagore also said that we are divided by the narrow domestic walls. Tagore, way back in the 17th century, way back in the, past, in the yesteryears, Rabindranath Tagore had said that we human beings actually do not value humanity. We human beings actually do not understand humanity. We have been divided by the narrow geographical or narrow domestic walls. But ultimately, we need to come together. And that is what even here you find. All the leaders, all the people, they have come to hail human dignity, to hail the common justice. We have at last achieved our political emancipation. Emancipation is very much needed. What kind of a human being are you if you do not have the freedom of speech and expression? What kind of a human being are you if you are still daunted and dominated by the narrow-mindedness? By narrow-mindedness. What kind of of an individual are you if you do not value education? And education, remember, leads to emancipation, freedom. We pledge ourselves to liberate all our people from the continuing bondage of poverty, deprivation, suffering, gender, and other discrimination. That is actually freedom. Nelson Mandela very clearly figures out. Nelson Mandela very clearly draws the line, and he explains to the people that a country where you find uneducation, a country where you find discrimination, growth and development can never ever happen. So finally, he's happy, he's proud to declare that he, along with all the other people, along with the entire nation, he is emancipated. Never, never, and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another. What is oppression? Oppression, discrimination, these things practically stop the growth of a nation. Look at India. Unfortunately, we fight in the name of religion. There is so much of hatred brooding in the people. This has to stop. Only then can we be able to value the presence of each other. If we as human beings keep on discriminating, if we as human beings fall victims to hatred and oppression, dominance, a country can never ever proceed, a country can never ever grow. And that's what Mandela told long time back. And he talked about oppression. He wants to come out of that oppression. And he does not want his people to be experiencing the same state of oppression. What did the whites do to his country? What did the Western world do to his country, his people? They always oppressed them. They suppressed them. That innate inner hatred was always visible. And Mandela grew up to fight against these issues. The sun shall never set on so glorious a human achievement. This sun is basically symbolic. Sun is lambent, is bright. And the application of this sun that has been used in this particular part of the prose, let me tell you, this sun is very much symbolic. This sun is symbolic of development. This sun is symbolic of improvement. This sun is actually talking about growth. And that sun is very glorious. On human achievement, let freedom reign. God bless Africa. Freedom here does not mean just the physical freedom, but emotional freedom. And believe me, literature has always celebrated mankind. Literature has always celebrated humanity. Literature has always celebrated world. If we as human beings do not know how to appreciate others, what kind of a human being are we? A few moments later, we all lifted our eyes in awe as a spectacular array of South African jets. The jets were all flying, and it was a spectacle to watch. It was a beautiful sight. Helicopters and troop carriers roared in perfect formation over the Union buildings. It was not only a display of pinpoint precision and military force, but a demonstration of the military's loyalty to democracy, to a new government that had been freely and fairly elected. And that is important. If I draw a comparison between India and South Africa at this point of time, we also see the same things happening on Republic Day. And we also know how important is a country's military, or when I say a country's army. And why would it not be so? Ultimately, all of us, all the Indians or all the South Africans at this point of time are fighting for one common cause. And the cause is the country's development. There is no harm in that. If I being an Indian, if you being an Indian, we aspire to see a better India, I don't think there is anything wrong in that. So even Mandela was very proud. Even the people were very much participative to show their zeal, to show their loyalty for the South African government. Only moments before, the highest generals of the South African Defence Force and police, their chests bedecked with ribbons and medals from days gone by, saluted me and pledged their loyalty. And this is how it happened. All the people from the police force, the military, everybody pledged his loyalty to the newly elected president. I was not unmindful of the fact that not so many years before they would not have saluted but arrested me. And this is where we talk about, or rather, we start talking about Mandela's struggles. Talk about the Indian independence. There have been many freedom fighters who have laid their lives for the country. And they were all nonconformists. They did not, comply with the British government. Why? Because they always wanted to see a new country. They always wanted to breathe freedom. They always wanted to see a developed country. And this dream is very right for any individual. Now, the same thing Mandela even tells in the story, that the same people who were saluting him, the same people who were actually paying respect to him, had it been a couple of years back, these would have been the same people who would have probably arrested Nelson Mandela for dreaming big. As I had told you one day, I had told you the other day, Rome was not built in a day. It takes years. It takes years for dreams to come true. And that is exactly what you find even here. Finally, a chevron of Impala jets left a smoke trail of the black, red, green, blue, and gold of the new South African flag. So the jet planes had formed the South African flags in the sky. Imagine how beautiful. The day was symbolized for me by the playing of our national anthems and the vision of white singing Kosi Sikelel, Africa, and black singing Die Stem. the old anthem of the Republic. Although that day neither group knew the lyrics of the anthem they once despised, they would soon know the words by heart. The new government which had been formed, the new anthem which had been formed, there had been many people who had despised that anthem. They did not want to think of, they did not want to appreciate the anthem, but somewhere a beginning had to be made. So the same people who did not like the South African anthem would be learning the lyrics of the anthem by heart. The story basically talks about victory. It talks about victory of man. It talks about victory of a nation. And most importantly, it is the victory of ideologies for the right. If you aspire something which is correct, if you aspire for something that is correct, that is right, and if you struggle to achieve it, you will definitely get it. And that is the crux of this particular story. Because even Nelson Mandela had to see lots. Even Nelson Mandela had to suffer lots. But somehow that did not stop him, from reaching that point of his aspirations. On the day of inauguration, I was overwhelmed with a sense of history. In the first decade of the 20th century, a few years after the bitter Anglo-Boer War, and before my own birth, the white-skinned peoples of South Africa patched up their differences and erected a system of racial domination against the dark-skinned people of their own land. What a penury! What a misery! And this is how domination was visible in South Africa. The white-skinned people, as I told you, they were very much dominating, and they always looked down upon the blacks. They always looked down upon the South Africans. They did not give them the social prestige that they deserved. And finally, the structure they created formed the basis of one of the harshest, most inhumane societies the world has ever known. Now, in the last decade of the 20th century and my own 8th decade as a man, that system had been overturned forever and replaced by one that recognized the rights and freedoms of all people, regardless of the color of their skin. This is very important. And this is what makes Nelson Mandela a true leader. It is very easy to be judgmental about people. It is very easy to downcast them. It is very easy to look down upon people. It is very difficult to appreciate them. It is very difficult to judge everybody equally. And it is also very difficult to do justice to everybody whatsoever. And Mandela emerged as a leader who had these qualities in him. Finally, that one day arrived in his life. Finally, that one day arrived in the lives of everybody, where they would not be judged on the basis of color, caste, creed, etc., etc., etc. That day had come about through the unimaginable sacrifices of thousands of my people. Yes. As I had told you, no dream is possible without hard work. Nothing is achievable unless we know how to struggle And finally, after the sacrifices of thousands of South African people, that one day had finally arrived. People whose sufferings and courage can never be counted or repaid. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, that I was simply the sum of all those African patriots who had gone before me. You talk about India. Britishers had been ruling India for more than 250 years. And finally, we saw freedom. Mandela also commemorates all those freedom fighters, all those patriots who actually laid their lives, who were martyrs. And he's grateful to them. You talk about Bhagat Singh, you talk about Rajguru, you talk about Chandrasekhar Azad, you talk about Sukhdev, you talk about Khudiram Bose, you talk about any freedom fighter. Each freedom fighter who laid his life for the country had one vision and one dream, and that was emancipation. That was complete freedom. Freedom of movement, freedom of thoughts, freedom of living as a human being. And South Africans were also deprived of their freedom. And after many years of struggles, after many years of social injustice encountered by these people, this one day had finally come. And Nelson Mandela had been a catalyst. He had been strong enough to fight for the freedom of his people and his nation. So he is grateful to those freedom fighters and the martyrs and the patriots. I felt that day, as I have on so many other days, as he tells here. That long and noble line ended and now began again with me. I was pained that I was not able to thank them, and that they were not able to see what their sacrifices had wrought. There was an amount of repentance on the part of Nelson Mandela because he did not, he could not show them that their sacrifices had finally wrought, had borne fruits in the form of the South African freedom. The policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound in my country and my people. All of us would spend many years, if not generations, recovering from the profound hurt. But the decades of oppression and brutality and other unintended effect, it produced the Oliver Tambos, the Walter Sisulu, and the Chief Luthulus, the Yusuf Dadus, the Bram Fishers, the Robert Soboks of our time. Men of such extraordinary courage, wisdom, generosity. Now these names happen to be of all the martyrs, all the freedom fighters who had actually sacrificed their lives. They were wise, they were courageous, they were generous, and those people had laid their lives basically for the emancipation of South Africa. Perhaps it requires such depths of oppression to create such heights of character. What Mandela wants to convey here is, that immense oppression, that immense hatred that they had suffered from, made them very strong. So strong that they were able to fight back against all those social evils. My country is rich in the minerals and gems that lie beneath its soil. But I have always known that its greatest wealth is its people. Let me tell you at this point of time, don't get swayed by what you see around you. Real wealth lies here. Real prosperity lies here in the thought process. And that is exactly what Mandela means. Mandela is not daunted by the wealth of the world. Mandela is very much focused on his people, and he knows that his people are truer and pure as diamonds. And that is exactly what defines the destiny of any country. So for today, we are going to stop here. Please go through this and understand the sacrifices made by the South African people. Nelson Mandela, as a leader, values these sacrifices, and that is what makes him emerge as a true leader. I hope you understood the explanation. If there is any doubt, you can surely come back and ask whatever doubts you have. Till then, have a good day. Hari Om.